Excellent. That's interesting, and that's more of a balanced position as well. Whenever, because you can get very aggressive, right, with your beliefs. But as we'll discuss today, you mentioned certainty, which is an interesting point.
Yeah.
Right, and you're skeptical of the certainty that religious or Muslim people have,
Yeah.
as well as on the opposite end of the spectrum that certain new atheists have, like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and so on and so forth. So, touching upon reasons for belief, when someone asks or an atheist asks the question of, "What's your reasons to believe in God?" or "Prove to me God exists," or "Give me proofs and evidences of God," this is where we're going to begin with this very question itself.
Okay.
And really assess this question before we start engaging with it. Because what we do is normally when the question is asked to a Muslim, for example, we start to answer the question. Yeah, we give an answer, a lengthy answer, we go back and forth. But there are certain assumptions of the question itself that we need to tackle first, right? Now, when someone asks a question about evidence for God, proof for God, prove to me God exists, one of the underlying assumptions of that question is that God is not necessary.
Yeah.
That God is an addition. I have the luxury of assessing whether he exists or not, and then choosing to accept him or not.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So there is that assumption that God is not necessary for reality to make sense, for my existence to make sense, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I would disagree with that premise and idea.
Okay.
So what my position is, I would say God is necessary for existence,
Yeah.
for this reality to exist, for us as human beings to exist. And that being the case, and we'll discuss this and go into this, but that being the case, then what follows is that whenever someone asks a question, well, prove to me God exists, you fall into the place where you have to then prove your ability to question God's existence as well, because God is so necessary for human existence and the human faculties and our ability to reason and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? Does my position make sense? Okay, so what do I mean by necessary?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, you have to explain the word necessary.
Okay,
Yeah.
because this is now what ties in with the certainty point that you're making, right? When I say God is necessary, I mean God is necessary for everything in existence to make sense. Whether it be morality, our moral compass that we have as human beings, whether it be just the order that exists within this universe, the laws of physics, the mathematical laws within nature, the other laws within nature, the reality of this universe, which is that it is ordered. It allows for intelligent life to exist. It allows for the world we see around us to exist, with all of the, they call it fine-tuning, but with all of the balances, all of the factors required for you and me to exist, right?
Yeah.
I would even go further and say that even our existence as rational beings, human beings that have the ability to reason, to have such discussions, right? Because we're engaging in a rational discussion right now.
Are you sure about that?
Well, I personally, I would say yes, I am sure about that. We're trying to have a rational discussion.
You see, I think this is where I would differ, because I don't think just because we're having this discussion that it means it's rational. Because it could be just as much of an irrational discussion, but we're still having it. Just because we're having it and we're kind of understanding the words that we're using and we're understanding the conversation, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a rational conversation.
But wouldn't you say when we go into a discussion with someone, the whole purpose of a discussion is to have an outcome?
Is it?
Well, that's why we as human beings have a discussion. For example, if you were to have a discussion with your boss about your work, there's a reason behind it, right? Or if you were to have a discussion with your wife about something, right? There's always a reason behind the things we do. We don't do things for no reason as human beings. Would you agree to that?
Well, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I don't think there's just like one reason or like a set of reasons, but there could also be like...
Say there's 10 reasons or 15 reasons,
or
a multitude of reasons.
Much more complicated.
But the point is that there are reasons there, right?
Sure, I'll accept that.
And that being the case, so if we're having a rational discussion, there has to be a reason for us to have it, right? And my point here is that when we engage in a rational discussion, the assumption there is that we can get to the bottom of something, whatever we're discussing.
What is the bottom?
So, for example, you hold the position that atheism is true, that God doesn't exist at the moment. Would you say that?
That's the position I hold.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so that's a belief, right? And that belief is based on some reasons.
Right.
So, if you were to say you are not rational, or you can't have a rational discussion or have rational reasons for something, then how did you arrive at that belief? Do you see my point?
Well, I can arrive at a belief. I don't have to believe that this belief is rational, because I think the way you're using rational doesn't really explain the way human beings function.
Okay, so when you hold the belief in atheism right now, why do you hold that belief?
Why do I hold the belief that I'm an atheist?
Or that atheism is true for you? Because obviously you believe it to, if you believe it to be true, right? At the moment,
Yeah,
the moment.
yeah.
So you
I
have
believe
a,
it to be true for me at the moment.
so that's a truth claim, right? So you're holding a position which you believe to be true. Why do you believe that to be true?
Well, that gets into a separate discussion, but
No, because the point is that
Yeah.
there's reasons you have that belief.
yeah.
So, and I'm assuming you have thought about this, right? And you've come to this conclusion. So you've employed your rational faculties and you've therefore trusted them to lead you to the conclusion that atheism is true right now, at the moment for you.
Yeah, I mean, when you say trusted or rational, I'm skeptical of the certainty
Because
of
you
the
believe
use
there's
of these
truth.
words.
There are truths.
There are truths, yes, of course there are
Okay,
truths.
so how do you arrive at truth?
Well, there are many different kinds of truth, first
Yeah,
of all.
sure.
There's many different kinds of truth. There's a truth of like experience, for example.
Yes.
There is a truth of
I agree 100%.
science.
Yeah.
Because we're human beings, we can't just rely on science for truth.
But
Because
as
scientific truth doesn't explain like the human condition.
Yeah.
Right?
No, but what I'm saying is, as you as a human being,
Yeah.
like science can't tell you whether God exists or not, right? Because God is a metaphysical reality beyond the physical. Science deals with the physical. So the question of God is not a question of science.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you hold the position God does not exist as an atheist.
As far as I can see, I don't see the existence of God. I don't. There's no evidence for it for me, and I don't.
But you know what you're saying right now? This seeing, I don't see. That means I don't have reasons to believe.
Yeah.
So therefore, you holding that position, that shows that you believe in the ability to reason, or you accept that as human beings we can reason. Otherwise, you wouldn't hold that. Do you
Of
see what I'm
course,
saying?
no. I understand that human beings can reason. I'm just skeptical of the way you're employing the word and the way you're using it in this.
Okay, let me
conversation.
define what I mean
Yeah.
for reason, just so we're clear. When I say as human beings we have the ability to reason and to attain truth, what I mean is this: that as human beings we have the mental faculties and the tools that are required to assess something and reason upon that something and to understand the truth of the thing. Maybe not right away, we may get things wrong, but we have the ability to reach truth eventually with many things.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So we have the faculties and tools required to reach truth. Does that make sense?
We have the possibilities. We have. Yeah.
We have that ability,
Yeah, we
right?
have-
And that's why we reach the positions we do. That's why we say I'm a Muslim or I'm an atheist or whatever the case is.
I don't know. I think you're making too much of a big step.
Okay, let's break it down one thing at a time. So we do agree that we have the ability to arrive at truth.
Yeah.
Maybe not all the time at the first attempt, but we do have the ability to arrive at truth through our rational faculties. So therefore, what we're saying is we have the ability and the tools required to reason and attain truth. This thing that we call truth.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's what I'm saying, basically. Yeah. Now, well, my point, going back to what we were discussing originally, is that even that ability
Yeah.
cannot be made sense of without God. That's what my point was. That's why God is necessary for that. That's what I was saying. Okay? But before we discuss this, for us to really appreciate what I'm saying about necessity of God when assessing the existence and we look into the physical world and we look into ourselves as human beings, when it comes to assessing the necessity of God from that perspective, when we discuss this in a minute, that why God is necessary for these things, I believe, what we have to do is and I believe you have this, and this was why we've had those previous discussions as well, we have to start with a very humble, sincere position, from a position of sincerity, from a position of internally wanting to understand what's going on, sincerely. There's no baggage, there's no, I have this belief, I'm going to defend it, even if the truth comes, I'm still going to, no. We have this sincere, humble outlook. That is the gateway, that's the doorway to understanding the necessity of God and really understanding what I'm going to discuss with you today, basically, right? And the reason I say this, bro, is because look, we've seen many discussions in the park before. Atheists, Muslims, they're both using rational arguments, right? They both have the same tools, right? They're both employing the tools, but they come to two totally different conclusions, right? And that's very interesting because both of them are using rational faculties, but they come to two different conclusions because there's something else going on. There's something else which is almost directing our ability to reason and the conclusions we come to. And that's what I want to address first, is because there is this internal compass. And this is why I'm mentioning sincerity, humility.
You're talking about bias as well.
Yeah. So I'm saying for us to have a really productive, sincere conversation, we have to really just have that position internally that I'm open. I've been blessed with these faculties. I've been blessed with the ability to reason and engage. Now let's sincerely engage, just to show gratitude. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, bro. And this is what's very interesting, bro, is even in the Quran, God out of His mercy, when He engages with the human being, because this is discourse with the human being, these are the words of God, and this is a communication for the human being. God addresses this existential reality of the human being. For example, God says, I believe it's هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. God says, and this is a rhetorical question. Hal here is a rhetorical question in Arabic. So this is hal ata ala al-insani. Wasn't there a time, God says, upon the human being, talking to you and me, addressing you and me, wasn't there a time upon us human beings that we weren't even a thing mentioned? Shay'an madhkura. The word shay'an is used there, which signifies a thing. So you know, as human beings, when we refer to ourselves, you're a person, I'm a person. We're a self. I'm an I, you're an I. You're this being. You refer to yourself with that dignity, that respect. But God is saying that there was a period, and the word used here for time is dahr. In the Arabic, the word dahr is very interesting because it signifies, one of the things it signifies is a very long period of time. Very, very long period of time. For example, in another part of the Quran, God uses the word asr. Wal asr, by time. He swears by time. And asr signifies a very a rapid type of time, a type of time which is running out. Asr, normally, you probably know there's the Asr prayer the Muslims pray. Probably heard of that. And that's the time of day where the time is just fleeting by, it's just running out, right? It's going, you notice the day just go to the night, the sky turns dark, right? But here God uses the word dahr. And God is saying, wasn't there a long period of time, you and me, let's speak to ourselves, that you weren't even a thing mentioned? And that's true. We can agree with that. Even as an atheist, you would agree with that. The fact that there was a huge period of history that you yourself weren't even a thing that was mentioned.
Oh, sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
So, and that makes, because the thing with us human beings is, bro, we don't reflect over where we came from or where we're going all the time. Normally we wake up, we look at ourselves in the mirror and we think, this is me, I've always been like this. Yeah? Seldom do we think about where we came from. Right? Because when you think about where you came from and where you're going, it's a real reality check for us human beings. It's a reality to existence and we're going to die. Right? And that's a big reality check for us. And God gives us these reality checks in the Quran because it evokes that humility within the human being. Because arrogance comes from thinking that you are the be-all and end-all. There is nothing beyond you. I am the greatest creative being. I have the ability to understand the world around me. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So God reminds us about our reality, our where we came from. So when God says this, it really brings this humility out. If you're really sincere and you think about this point that I've made, that there was a long period of time, bro, where you didn't even exist. You were not even a thing. Not forget person, you weren't even a thing.
The modern human is only about 200,000 years old.
Yeah. No, but think about you as a person.
Yeah.
Just the individual.
As an individual, of course, yeah. I'm just a speck.
Yeah. And you know what? A majority of the time this existence has been around, you didn't exist.
Yeah.
And there will be a long period of time once you die, you'll be longer under the ground than you are above the ground. Mm-hmm. Do you understand that point, bro? That brings humility. And then in another part of the Quran, God says, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. And this is very interesting as well. He says, He created man from a drop of fluid, a mingled drop of fluid, right? The sperm and the egg and so on and so forth, right? I don't know the science behind it completely. But the point here is not to understand the science, is to appreciate where we came from. We came from this dirty fluid. And then God says, almost instantly, this creation stands in front of God as a contender, as a challenger. You know, give me proof for your existence. I don't believe you exist. Because it's a very arrogant position when you really think about where you came from or where you're going. Do you understand that point?
Well, if you put it in that context, then it can very much seem arrogant. And I see that with a lot of atheists. They have this like, well, I have this demand that needs to be met. I have this demand upon like the religious people or God that they need to explain everything. And then I can believe, kind of thing. But I wouldn't characterize my position as arrogance, because
I'm not saying you're sorry. I was just trying to, and it's for the wider audience as well to appreciate that when we engage with atheists generally, the new atheists, the aggressive ones, we just get into the discussion of proofs, and it goes nowhere. They leave the same atheist a bit more angry. You know, you leave the same Muslim a bit more angry towards atheists. Do you see? But for us to have a very productive, sincere discussion, and this is why I like talking to you, bro, is because you have that humility and sincerity to engage on that level, right? You're saying, look, I'm an atheist right now, but I'm open to a discussion, a sincere discussion. And that's why I'm mentioning this. So do you, at the very least, you appreciate the point that I'm making?
No, I appreciate the point you're making, but I think there's also a danger in it because it can seem like from what you're doing is it can give license to religious people to say, well, you know what, this is what I believe, and it kind of just ends there. If I keep questioning, then that can just seem arrogant. Or that can just seem, like I'm demanding too much from God. Who am I to demand something like that from God?
It's a very good point, bro.
Whereas I don't see that so much as a bad thing. I think, to a certain extent, we have to keep questioning. Just existing in itself, we're kind of questioning all the time. We're kind of curious about the world. We're curious about like why we're here. Why am I in this place? Why am I speaking in this way? Why do I hold these beliefs? Why do I have these preferences? That as human beings, we are always already curious about the world that is around us.
And we should be.
And we should be.
It's a part of our nature to be curious.
And what I tend to find with the religious people, and you find it with atheists as well, but you tend to find with the religious people sometimes is that there is like this, there's an aversion to wanting to question. And sometimes it comes from this, this point that you make that what it can seem arrogant. And from another perspective, it can just seem like, well, why do I have to question, my existence? I've got the Quran, I've got the Hadith, and that's more than enough, right? And I see that just as a bit of a cop-out.
Can I give you the balance?
Yeah.
So the balance here is, and this is why I said that this is the beginning of the discussion. I was just premising the discussion.
Yeah.
We don't say, okay, this is it. Be humble. Don't ask any questions.
Yeah.
There is a balance that I'm trying to strike here that we need to really appreciate, which is that begin the discussion with that understanding of what you are as a human being, and which necessitates, if you're sincere, to have that sincere position, to then engage rationally, but with that open heart and mind, and then go into the discussion and question and answer those questions and go back and forth and have that discussion. That's very important, bro. So that's the balance. I'm not saying don't ask the questions. I'm saying let's do that. Let's engage on that level, but start with the right foundation.
Sure.
Right? Don't start with, and this is not just arrogant on the atheist, but on a Muslim level side of the spectrum as well. As a Muslim and atheist, or whoever you are having a discussion, start with humility, start with that sincerity, and start with that real desire to really try to learn from each other.
Sure, yeah,
that's the point, bro.
That's very important.
So
that's very, very important. And you don't see that from both sides in this park. You hardly ever see that from both sides.
I mean, there's some really good discussions, but there's some really bad discussions too.
Yeah.
So we have to have that, and this is what our tradition teaches. When you look at the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, without going off on a tangent, when he would talk to people, bro, he was all about that person. He would face them physically. He wouldn't be talking to them like this. He would be face front on. He would smile. He would engage with the people. And to the point where, all the people thought they were the most beloved to him. Whoever came into his companions, they thought they were the most beloved to him just because the way he treated the people. Unfortunately, we don't have to treat people these days, right? So I really want to begin that discussion with these premises that we're really engaging as human beings. We respect each other as human beings, and we have that open heart and open mind when we get into this discussion.
Sure, yeah.
And just to touch upon the point I made earlier about the necessity of God, and that's why questioning God's existence is almost, you'll have to question your ability to question before you question God's existence. That was my point. Let me explain what I mean. Is that, like we started off by saying, that the ability to reason, and we agreed that we as human beings, we have the ability to reason, and we have the ability to use these tools we have to attain truth and come to truth and understand truth in the world around us. What truth is another discussion, but if we can just agree on that for now, we can have somewhat of a productive discussion. We can maybe have the discussion of truth later as we go along. So would you accept that premise for now, that we have the ability?
Repeat the premise.
So the thing I'm asking you to see if you agree upon the point, which is that as human beings we have the ability to reason and to use these rational faculties that we have to attain truth.
We have the ability. Yeah.
It may not happen the first time we engage with that rational process, but eventually we can get to the truth of things.
Okay.
Yeah? And obviously we have deduction, the ability to deduce things. We have the inductive method, which is a scientific method to do observations, reason upon those observations, and try to understand reality. All of these tools, this is all a part of the rational processes, our ability to exercise these things, right?
Yeah.
So if we agree to that, bro, the question then arises, is that, yes, we're rational as human beings, we have the ability to attain truth. How do we make sense of this ability, what we're exercising right now, without God? I would argue that it's impossible to account for our ability to reason and to attain truth without God's existence. And that's one reason why God is necessary. You know, just purely based on our ability to reason. We'll touch upon the other things later. Do you understand and appreciate that point?
I can understand that. And that's kind of been the position of a lot of like the Christian kind of monks and the Christian kind of scientists like Descartes and so forth. That was kind of their position, wasn't it? And it just so happens as well that the science or the scientific method arose through Western and so-called Abrahamic religions, you know, like Christianity, Islam. You think about like Ibn Haytham and Ghazali and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, and it's a problem I have as an atheist, because I see the rise of science was heavily influenced by you know, religious people who were often very deeply religious. Like Newton was a very religious guy. He was a very fervent religious person. Yeah. So it's something I struggle with, to be honest.
And it's very interesting, bro, because something they appreciate generally, even the Western scientists, Christian scientists, or supposed Christian scientists, the Muslim world, the Muslim scientists, what they understood was that there were principles within nature. There were laws within nature which were very precisely balanced, and they could be studied, right? Because look, science relies upon study. You have to study the physical world around you. If the world had no order, there were no laws in place, then there would be nothing to study, because everything would be continuously changing. Right? So you would not have any knowledge from that perspective, scientific knowledge, empirical knowledge, data. Well, you'll be able to do observations as a rational human being, but one day you'll do an observation, it'll look one way, the situation or whatever you're observing, and the next day it'll look a totally different way. You won't get anywhere, right? Yeah. So what's very interesting, bro, is that science, the method itself, and many new atheists are taking this and running away with it, right? They're saying, oh, we have science, we don't need God. But what I would say is that for you to have science, or science necessitates God's existence. And let me explain why. Because to do science, you need two things. One of the things we've discussed already is our ability to reason. We may have touched upon this before, but our ability to reason as human beings. And the second thing it requires, bro, is for something there to be studied. There has to be order there for us to pick up on that order and study it, right?
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to be ordered always, but yeah, I can see.
If it wasn't ordered, you couldn't study.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it has to be ordered.
Yeah. So this is the point. So you have these two things: a human rational mind. So you need the studier, the one that studies, and has the ability to take observations and use reasoning upon the observations, and then understand what's going on. And you require something there which is ordered enough to be studied, right? Both of these things, bro, I would argue you cannot make sense on a naturalistic, atheistic worldview. It's impossible, because what's the foundation of atheism? What's the core belief, or the bread and butter, right at the foundation? It's this, bro. Everything that exists in the universe, this physical world, is a result of blind, random, dead, physical stuff. Just physical atoms and molecules whizzing around, bumping into and colliding into each other randomly, gases and molecules, and they have somehow resulted in everything we see around us.
Yeah.
Now,
it's accidental. It's purely accidental.
So for me, that's absurd to claim that everything, all the order we perceive in the universe, and our ordered rational minds, which can pick up on this order, and both of these things are required to do science, the scientific method, can arise from these just random physical processes and stuff. Do you see? Can you see what
I can see your point, and I think it's a very tempting one, but I don't think it's.
I would say it's a very rational one. Okay, why isn't it convincing to you?
I just don't find it to be very convincing. I mean, just because we see order, and just because we can study something and make sense of it, doesn't mean that it necessarily had to have a creator.
Okay, so how would you account for the order of the universe and the laws that govern the universe and the ordered rational human faculties that we use? Right now, how would you
Right now, as an atheist, if I'm being honest, it's a difficult question. It's a really difficult question, because I can't say definitively, how I can make sense of that.
And you said it's tempting.
What is tempting?
The proposition I'm giving you.
Yeah, it's tempting to think that there was a God creator behind all this.
Yeah, but why wouldn't you accept it? What I'm saying basically is, why wouldn't you accept what common sense dictates, and why wouldn't you accept the obvious? For example, just to preface that, for example, whenever we live our day-to-day lives, You know, we do things based on common sense and what's most rational and probable, right?
Are you sure about that?
For example, if I told you to cross the M4 motorway blindfolded, would you do that?
Some might do it.
But would you do that?
I probably wouldn't, no.
So why wouldn't you do that?
Well, because I mean, I want to continue living.
Yeah. So there's a although there's a chance you may survive,
Yeah.
but there's a greater chance that you may kill yourself in the process, right? So what you're doing is you're employing common sense, right?
In this specific case, you are,
But what I'm saying is you do it with all of your life. So what I'm saying is when it comes to the proposition I've given you, which is that, which you said is very tempting, that God is the best explanation and necessary for us to make sense of reality, and you said it's tempting, why wouldn't you accept that? Because that's more likely than these simpler examples I've given you.
Well, I don't know, because when I say tempting, I don't mean it's more like, I think it's a good thing, or by tempting, I don't mean it's more accurate. By tempting, I mean it could just be like, tempting as in like, oh, that's an easy explanation.
But would you, okay, be very honest.
Yeah.
Would you say it's a good explanation? Not that you accept it. Would you say it's a good explanation? Number one.
Well.
If you're very honest.
No, if I'm being honest, it's a hard question. So I can't say yes or no.
Because if it's tempting for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's something that you know that
it's tempting in the sense that if you think about this watch, you think there must have been a maker for this watch.
Yeah,
but when you apply that to human beings, it's different.
But look, human beings are far more complex than the watch you're wearing.
No, they are more complex.
They make the watch.
They do make the watch, but
okay, let me put it this way. What I've said, not that you agree with it, does it make sense? Number one.
It makes sense. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. But just because it makes sense doesn't mean it's accurate.
Is it a rational? What should I say? Is it a rational possibility?
Of course.
Okay. Is it in line with what common sense dictates?
Yeah, I'll go that far as well.
So then why wouldn't you accept that? That's what I want to know. Because this is where what we discussed previously.
Yeah, we did.
Is what's going on inside now. If it's rationally digestible, common sense, according to common sense, it makes sense. Yeah. It's quite simple. It's quite, it makes sense, like you said. Then why wouldn't? That's fine. Take your time.
Where are we?
So we're talking about the proposition I've given you, that the ordered universe, the laws within the universe, our ability to reason as human beings, to reason to the truth, understand concepts like truth, all of these things, they best make sense if the simplest, most rational conclusion is that there has to be a cause, a creator that put these things into place, and that these things haven't arisen from blind, random physical processes and causes. Wouldn't you accept that point? It's a very simple, rational point that I'm making.
It's simple, it's rational,
it's very intuitive as well.
Well, yeah, it could be very intuitive as well, but I remain skeptical. I remain skeptical of that.
Okay.
Just like I remain skeptical about many other things.
Fair enough. But would you apply that same skeptical outlook on other things in your life now as well? So let's go back to the motorway example.
Yeah.
You're blindfolded. You said you wouldn't run across it because there's a chance you may die, a great chance you may die. Would you be skeptical of the fact that there's a greater chance you may die and still take the chance? You wouldn't even consider it. So what I'm saying is just consistency.
Yeah, but no, I know. You're trying to catch me out. It's fair enough.
No, I'm just trying to. Even if you say I'm trying to catch you out, fair enough. Yeah. But all I'm trying to catch you out on is the point of being consistent.
Yeah. No, it's fair enough, but also, I mean, the example itself is not really the best example we can give because it's quite an extreme example. If you look at the everyday human being and how they live their everyday, day-to-day life, they don't consider these things. This is not something that is a part of what it means to be a human being living in the everyday world.
What's that? Consider what?
Common sense and intuition and these kind of things.
But we use these.
They don't really come into. They don't really come into the argument much. I mean,
but I would say
we're just living. We're doing things. We do a lot of things that are irrational.
True, because we go by.
A lot of things that
I
are
agree,
irrational.
and you know what? And this is the thing. We can move
that's part of the makeup of a human being.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say a lot of things we do are based on how we feel inside, what we want to do, and then we just use our rational faculties to justify what we're doing.
Yeah,
right?
sure. Yeah.
Much of the case, for example, I don't know if you've been on a diet, but say you're on a diet for a week, you come home to a hot pizza, you will rationalize that slice of pizza.
Sure.
Right? You will justify it to yourself, I'll diet tomorrow, I'll fast for 3 days, you will justify it to yourself, right? So I would say we'll go by what's inside, this intuition, this sort of internal, well, in Islam we call it the nature of the human being, the fitrah, right? This is the innate nature of the human being, right? but we go by what we feel, right? And this leads me to another point, which is that all of these things we're discussing are very rational. And we're using our brains to reason about things right now. But the beautiful thing about belief, and we can conclude on this point, to give you things to go away and think about, is that in Islam, and unfortunately it's misrepresented that, you believe in, you just have faith. You just believe in God, yeah? And it's just a leap of faith, right? But in Islam, it's a bit different, because in faith, iman, closest thing you can say, faith, iman is not something that's just floating in thin air and you just go for it, right? Iman has things on either side of it, I would say, right? For example, in our tradition, we know, as human beings, we know we have a nature. There are certain things that are wired. If you like let's use modern terminology, certain things which are wired within our being as human beings. For example, there's been many studies on children, right, where they've said that, we're wired to be moral, for example, right? Or even atheists would say the humanists, for example, yeah? And if you think about it...
I'm not humanist.
No, I'm just saying, but those two things are a contradiction in themselves.
Yeah, I can see the contradiction.
But the point is that there are certain things which are a part of our nature. For example, if I say, killing an innocent child, is that wrong?
Well, for me, it's wrong.
Yeah, well, it is wrong, right?
For me, it's wrong.
And you don't have to reason about that. It just is. You know it is, right? Now, there are certain things which are just very natural and intuitive, right? And in Islam, we call this the fitra, the nature. And a great part of this nature is that what God has placed within it is the recognition of God. That there is an internal knowing that there is a creator. So on this side of iman, faith, is that knowing which is inside us already, right? And what happens is that due to our society and our upbringing, that reality becomes covered. Because as human beings, we're very attracted to what's around us and what's visible, right?
Sure, yeah.
And on top of it, we have desires as human beings, and we chase those things, right? That's how we live, generally speaking, right? And that fitra, that nature, becomes covered and clouded, right? But what happens is that fitra can become uncovered as well. And there are many things which could trigger it. It could be rational arguments, it could be a life-changing experience, whatever the case is, right? But the point I'm making here is that there is that nature. So on this side of iman, of faith, is that nature that God has given us already. The truth of Him already exists within us. And then on the other side, once you take that step now, based on your nature, that intuitive, what you said, that, and I would say what you said earlier about it being, what was the word you used? Tempting. Was it tempting? Tempting is that when you go with that temptation and that intuition, and you take the step and you accept that greater reality, then on the other side of iman, faith, are the signs which become apparent and clear to you. Right? For example, God says in the Quran, in the 3rd chapter, verse 190, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. That indeed in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the night and day are signs for people of lub, a purity and clear understanding. And then God says in the next verse who these people are. Those who remember God sitting, standing and lying down. Interesting. Because what this shows us is that the signs, according to these verses, are for those people who already recognize God. Do you see? So on both sides of this faith, there is something to cushion it. On this side, you have the fitra, that nature, which inclines you or turns you towards that reality, makes that reality tempting, tempts you towards accepting that truth. And on this side of it, you have the signs which become apparent to you. When you really just start to then observe reality and then you start to see things clearly. This is our philosophy, right? So, and the reason I'm mentioning this, and I will make this clear, bro, is because, and for future discussions you have with Muslims, is because what we do is on a very shallow level, we say, give me proofs for God's existence, and I'll give you proofs against God's existence, and use a reason on that basis, and you get nowhere. Because there are so many realities that are taking place. There are so many things that are taking place within the human being, which need to be understood and appreciated, for us to really understand it. And this is what it's all about. Because look, if God was going to come in front of you, bro, and say, I'm God, then there's no point of this existence, right? It's all over, right? There's no test anymore. But God has given us enough that if we were to sincerely, with a clear heart and mind, reflect over reality and just want to know the truth, and we ask God for guidance with humility. Remember what I said? It's about asking God as well for guidance, because He guides who He wills. God doesn't need anyone according to what God tells us in Islam. He's not dependent. He doesn't require anyone or anything, right? We need Him, right? So when we recognize that need that we have for Him, and we are sincere in our inquiry and we look into these realities, He will guide us. And what we believe is that everything that takes place happens with the leave of God. So even our guidance, if you became Muslim, say, next week, and I pray that you become Muslim and God opens your heart, because you're a very intelligent guy, and I really believe, we need people that think like you to be a part of Islam, because you're someone that can speak and represent with clarity and good manners, and you have all of these beautiful characteristics and traits, and Muslims, that those would be the means. There will be means in place. I reasoned, this happened in my life, I took these steps, I came across this argument, whatever the means may be. But ultimately, if you can see past that to what the real reality is, which is that God is in control of everything, and He is the one that put those means in place to guide you. So ultimately, we say all guidance is from God. He is the one that directs everything. So hopefully it's been beneficial.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Mr. Anything else you'd like to say before we conclude?
No, that's all. That's all for now, I think.
Any message you'd like to give to?
No, just keep studying, keep
Okay,
reading.
what about if someone's watching this?
Yeah.
And there are some atheists watching this?
Yeah.
What would be your message to them?
Well, I think just keep an open mind, to be honest. Keep an open mind, discuss with people with variety of faiths, and just don't close your mind. Just keep it open.
Thanks, bro.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
All right, man.
God
Thank
bless.
you.
Thank
All right, take care.